What's up guys, Justin here with the CGessensials.com, back with another Blender tutorial for you. So in today's video we're going to talk about a couple different ways to cut holes in objects inside of Blender. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. So one of the things that can get a little bit tricky in Blender is when you start trying to cut holes. And so I wanted to talk through a couple different ways that you can cut holes in different objects. And there's other ways as well. These are going to be three kind of basic ones. And then we may talk about more in the future. But for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to start off and we're going to add a plane. So I'm going to do a shift right click to set my cursor right here, and then I'm going to do a shift A and add mesh plane. And what we want to do is I'm going to move this off to the side over here, and we want to cut a hole in the middle of this square, or the middle of this plane. And so right now we can't do that because if we hit the tab key, you can see how all we have is we have 4 vertices or 4 edges going around the outside. There's not enough geometry in order to cut our hole. And so what we want to do is we want to start by right clicking on this surface and subdividing it. And so let's go ahead and we're going to subdivide this to 3 so that we have this central vertex in here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tap the 1 key to go into vertex editing mode, and then I am going to select this vertex right here, and I'm going to hit the delete key and I'm going to delete vertices. So what that's going to do is that's going to leave me with this box around the outside here. And at the moment right now, what we need to do is we need to take this geometry around the center and we need to make that into circular geometry because we want this to actually curve a little bit. So we don't want to come in here and subdivide this right now, because if we were to add a subdivision surface modifier to this one, and then you were to look at this, and let's turn on our wireframe real quick, you can see how it kind of works, but your geometry starts getting really weird and it doesn't really kind of follow a circle as we subdivide it. You see what I mean? This isn't a circular hole. And so let's get rid of this subdivision surface modifier, and what we want to do is we want to make sure we're in edit mode and we want to select the loop around the outside here. So I'm just going to do an alt click in order to select this loop. And what we want to do is we want to tell Blender to start treating this like a circle or like a sphere, rather than just a loop. And so the way that we can do that is we can just type in Alt-Shift-S. Well, when you type in Alt-Shift-S, what that's going to do is that's going to take this geometry and it's going to make it into a sphere. And you can see how I can actually move my mouse to the left or right, and this will actually kind of bend this around in a spherical or a circular shape. And so I want to move my mouse all the way to the right, so this is actually in here as a circle, and I want to click. And notice that once I click, it pops up this little box down here because we basically told it to use the 2 sphere command by typing Alt-Shift-S. And so notice that you get the same effect by clicking and dragging this right here, but we want this to be a factor of 1. Well, now if we were to take this and let's say we were to give it a solidify modifier, so if we were to go into modifiers, do a solidify, give it a little bit of thickness, so we'll give it some thickness right here, and then we were to give it a subdivision surface. See what that does is that subdivides this surface so that this is now in a circle rather than that kind of weird shape that kind of curved around the edges but wasn't actually circular. And if we were to take this and we were to click and drag this up, you can see how this subdivides this even more, and you can see with this geometry this is all quad geometry, so it's really good, helpful geometry. And one thing we want to do though is let's say that we didn't want this to come to a kind of a point in here. Let's say that we wanted this to be a little bit more of a refined circle. Well, what we would do is we would add an edge loop along the middle. So for now, I'm just going to turn off this in my viewport. So I'm going to turn off my subdivision surface in my viewport, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to hit tab to go out of edit mode, and we're going to apply this solidify modifier. And so when we apply that, what that means is this becomes geometry we can edit. So right now we haven't applied this, so if we go in here and we try to edit this, try to add a loop cut, you can see how it only allows us to add a loop cut on the flat portion of this because this just has a modifier associated with it. It's not the actual geometry yet. Well, if we tab out of this, click on apply, what that does is that makes this into an actual 3D object, so it applies that 3D geometry. Well, now we can hit tab, go back into edit mode and do a Control R. We can actually add loop cuts in here to actually affect what our subdivision surface modifier is going to do. So if I turn that back on, you can see how I can use those loops in order to make this flatter with just kind of a curve around the edge. So when you apply that, you can affect the way that this shape looks. So in addition to this, you can also, if I was to add a cube, I'm going to scale it down a little bit. I'm going to move it over right here. Another trick you can use is you can use what's known as the bridge edge loops function. So the bridge edge loops function will take edges and it will basically create edges between the vertices on those faces. So the way that that works is if we were to hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and what I want to do is I want to go into face select mode by tapping 3, and I want to select both of these faces and I want to inset them. So I can just type the I key in order to inset them. And so you're going to notice what that does is that insets both faces because you had both of these selected. Well, what we want to do now is we want to use a function called bridge edge loops. And so the way that I find that is I type F3 and then I type in bridge edge loops, and what that allows me to do is that allows me to find that function. If I click on it, what it does is it bridges between the edge loops that we had selected. So you can see how it draws lines between the vertices of the faces we had selected. So that's an easy way to add a hole inside of something like this box right here. So now the last way I'm going to show you to cut a hole is by using a different object in order to cut the hole. So let's say, for example, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to tell this to subtract one object from another object. So the way that we can do that is we can do a Shift A, and we're going to add a, we'll call it a UV sphere right now. I'm going to scale it down a little bit. Then I'm going to add another object, which is going to be a cylinder. I'm going to scale that down. And I'm going to move that cylinder off to the side right here. And I'm just going to do a rotate. So I'm going to do an RX90. And then I'm going to scale that along the y-axis. So this basically intersects with this sphere right here. And so what we want to do is we want to add a Boolean modifier. And so the Boolean modifier is going to allow us to basically use one object to affect another. And so we want to add the modifier to this sphere right here. So we're just going to click on the sphere, add a modifier, and click on Boolean. And so there's a few different options in here that we'll talk about in the future. For right now, we want the difference. The difference is going to remove one object from the other object. The way that we're going to do that is we have our sphere selected. Well, now we want to select the object that we want to use to remove our material. So in this case, that's going to be our cylinder. And so if you look at this right now, if you move this cylinder around, what this is doing is this is basically removing material wherever this cylinder intersects with our object. So in this particular situation, for example, if I was to turn off my cylinder, you can see how this has removed material wherever our cylinder was. So we can use a Boolean operation in order to remove material in that cylinder. So the only problem with this is your geometry gets a little bit weird. So if you're planning on subdividing things a little bit later, you need to be a little bit careful when you use this. So like if I do a subdivision surface modifier right here, you can see how you get this really nasty geometry around the corner because those weren't in here as quads. So you do need to be aware that if you're going to use the Boolean modifier, you need to be a little bit careful with the geometry you're creating. But if you're not really worried about that geometry, this is an excellent way to cut holes. And the other cool thing about this is if you decide you want to move this, so if you want to move your cylinder up, for example, you can just move it and notice that that hole moves along with your cylinder. So that's another quick, easy way to cut holes inside a Blender. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Was this helpful to you? Did you know about some of these ways of doing this? I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new Blender content every week. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.